Welcome to another screencast where I'll be discussing the gross anatomical structures and features of the brain. And by the end of this, you should be able to identify and describe 6 major regions of the adult brain, and then the anatomical landmarks and the major regions of the cerebrum, the diencephalon, the midbrain, pons, and medulla, all which make up what is known as the brainstem. So sometimes we hear people talk about the brainstem, and that's the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And then finally the cerebellum. Okay, so this is the first in a bunch of screencasts that will be discussing the features of the brain. So the brain has 6 major regions that are going to grow at different rates during development. So here we see the brain roughly at 13 weeks, and we can begin to identify these enlarging cerebral hemispheres, right? And so this is going to be these are going to be part of the cerebrum. This diencephalon is this central cluster of tissue in the middle of the brain. These cerebral hemispheres are going to be growing and overlapping the diencephalon there. And then we have the midbrain and the cerebellum, and again that midbrain, there are 3 parts there of that of the midbrain, and then not of the midbrain, of the brainstem here. And so these arrows are showing you that there's a growing and enlarging of the cerebral hemispheres, and then sort of a twisting and a contorting of it as well, such that at the adult brain stage here, we're going to have 2 cerebral hemispheres, again, surrounding this diencephalon. And then the cerebellum is more inferior and caudal to the cerebral hemispheres. And then your brainstem area is going to include the midbrain as well as the pons, the medulla oblongata. Okay, so if we look here at a lateral view of a completely whole human brain, we're able to identify some major structural landmarks. First, I want to point out the folds and the valleys, so the mountains and the valleys, if you will. So if we look at the cartoon down here, we will see that a gyrus, and the plural of gyrus is gyri, refers to the mountain part of that, or the enlarged, raised part of the brain tissue there. The sulcus then is the valley part, right? And so this tissue has been folded, right, like this, and so the valleys of the folds are referred to as sulci, right? And that's the plural, and gyri would be the singular there. A deep sulcus is sometimes referred to as a fissure, right? So if it penetrates a lot deeper than an individual sulcus, and this is kind of like subjective depth here, but fissures are generally really pretty deep, and you'll be able to see those, see both of them on the skull. I mean on the whole brain. If you do take a section through there, you'll be able to see the cerebral cortex, right, which is the rind or the outer part of the brain. Again, that is gray matter, and then you should also be able to very clearly see the white matter. And this gray matter often is gray because it's unmyelinated and has several nuclei, right? And then the white matter is white because it is primarily tracks. Okay. But back to the lateral view of the brain here, we can see then this central sulcus right here is a landmark that is going to separate the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe back here. And so this central sulcus, on the anterior side of that sulcus is the precentral gyrus, and posterior to that is the postcentral gyrus. So you should be able to identify those two, the precentral and the postcentral gyrus. And again, here we see the parietal lobe, and then this is the frontal lobe of the left cerebral hemisphere, so the frontal lobe, more toward the front of the brain. This lateral sulcus that we see here is going to be separating that frontal lobe up here from the temporal lobe right here. So this is roughly the temporal lobe, and then again, roughly outlining here the frontal lobe, and then here is the parietal lobe here. And then the most posterior part here is the occipital lobe right here. And so these are all landmarks of the cerebral hemispheres. Then coming out the bottom of the brain here, at the bottom of the inferior part of the brain, is the pons. We'll look at that in detail a little bit more later. The cerebellum is this enlarged structure here, and then the medulla oblongata is where the spinal cord is going to meet there, the brainstem. If we look at a superior view here, we're able to identify, first off, anterior and posterior. We have the two hemispheres of the brain, and so this is the right hemisphere, this is the left hemisphere of the cerebrum, and we see that there's a large longitudinal fissure that goes down between the two hemispheres, which you should be able to identify on the sheet brains that we have in class. Some of the brains will still have the dura mater or the arachnoid mater in place, and here we see the arachnoid mater, and then we're going to see blood vessels just deep to that, and which will look like very darkened black structures that are sitting in the sulci, right? And in between then the gyri. Okay? So here we just have another image of that brain for superior view there as well, showing you a little bit more detail here. Again, the lobes, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe. Can't really see the temporal lobe from this view as much, but you can see the sulci. Again, the depressions and blood vessels would be sitting in the sulci, and then the gyri are the ridges. If we take a mid-sagittal section through the brain, we are able to see here a medial view of the right hemisphere. And so we're able to first identify some things that we know. Here's this central sulcus, and the precentral gyrus and the postcentral gyrus. These are going to be important functional landmarks in a little bit. The corpus callosum here is a very large tract that contains millions and millions of axons that are going to connect to that right hemisphere to that left hemisphere. So if you had a sheep brain that was not sectioned already, you would have to section through that corpus callosum. So here's the corpus callosum. The tracts that are inferior to this are known as the fornix. Want to look at part of this diencephalon here. So this is one of the 6 major regions here. So you can only see the diencephalon after you make the sections here. And the diencephalon is anything thalamus, right? So you have the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and then the epithalamus. Right? So the thalamus is this central mass of tissue here. The hypothalamus is, as the name implies, below or lower than underneath the thalamus. Right? And then the epithalamus, right, contains the pineal gland. And so this is pineal. The pineal gland is part of that epithalamus there. And all 3 of those structures make up that diencephalon. We can also then see some of the structures here of the brainstem, and that is, of course, the midbrain. And so the midbrain structures are located here. There's a cerebral aqueduct that's going to separate these 2 midbrain structures, anteriorly and posteriorly. The pons is this enlarged structure here, and then the medulla oblongata is this structure down here that is where the spinal cord is going to join the rest of the brain. Right? And so the medulla oblongata sort of blends into that spinal cord there, and this is going to be at the foramen magnum, so that large hole in the bottom of the skull. And then finally, posterior to that brainstem section there is the cerebellum, right, that is physically separated here from the cerebral hemispheres as well. So there is the image, a real image of a sectioned brain. Here's a cartoon image. Again, you should be able to identify most of these structures in cartoon form as well as on an actual brain diagram or an actual brain model. Okay? So you want to be practicing with all of these terms today in class. When we look a little bit more closely at the Diencephalon and the brainstem. This is a very busy slide, so let me break this down here for you, or break it up a little bit for you. So let's just look at this top image here. The bottom image we've seen before, but let's look at the top two images up here. So I want to highlight, of course, this diencephalon. Right? And so that diencephalon, of course, is all the thalamus and the hypothalamus and the epithalamus. Right? And so this is in a lateral view. So we've removed the cerebral hemispheres from this diagram in order to see these centralized structures a little bit better. So the diencephalon is, again, the thalamus, the hypothalamus, and the epithalamus. This midbrain section here is the superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus. Right? And if you look at them from a posterior view, those colliculi also sometimes, they will make up what is sometimes referred to as the corpora quadrigemina. Gemina, twins, quad, 4 twins, corpora, bodies of 4 twins. And so if you can look at this, again, this is a posterior view. The corpora quadrigemina, you see that there are these 4 lumps right there of tissue. Right? These are the superior colliculi, and these are the inferior colliculi. And a colliculus is a hill or a mountain. So the early anatomists are looking at these things, trying to describe sort of what they are, which is why you get these kind of weird Latin names that are really sort of difficult to pronounce. But when you know what their roots are, you can sort of understand maybe why they're named that. Inferior to that, then, you're going to have the pons area. Right? It's in blue here, and then the medulla oblongata. Right? So again, diencephalon, midbrain structures, pons and medulla oblongata. You should be able to identify these on a cartoon as well as on the actual sheep brain. What are all these structures of the diencephalon and the brainstem? Well, these are all nuclei and bundles of ascending and descending tracts, which is why I put these images below here on this diagram as well. So if we can see here, nuclei in the thalamus, right? So this would be the thalamus region. And then here's our midbrain structures. Again, the superior and inferior colliculus is going to contain, ascending tracts. And if we look at the midbrain section here, right, it's going to contain a descending tracts as well. And then we see, of course, the medulla oblongata is going to be containing nuclei and tracts, right, ascending. And then here's the medulla oblongata section here containing nuclei and tracts as well. So this lower diagram is a little more microscopically structural than the top diagram. The top diagram is showing you sort of gross anatomical features. But then if you look and see what that tissue actually is, it's actually, these nuclei and ascending and descending tracts. Okay. So this imposing list of structures here are what you should be able to identify on the sheep brain, as well as an unsectioned sheep brain, or sectioned sheep brain, as well as an unsectioned sheep brain, okay, and also on a cartoon of some sort. So hopefully now you'll be able to grab a sheep brain back there and/or a blank diagram and label the 6 major regions of the adult brain, as well as the anatomical landmarks and major regions of that cerebrum, the diencephalon, which, remember, are the 3 thalamuses, hypothalamus and epithalamus, right? And then the brainstem structures, right? The midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And remember that midbrain here contains the superior colliculus and the inferior colliculus, or sometimes referred to as the corpora quadrigemina. Okay? And then finally that cerebellum. In other screencasts, we'll deal with the actual functions of these regions, but being able to identify where they are is kind of the first step. Okay, thanks a lot for listening. Bring your questions to class.